A racist barista's discriminatory behavior backfires spectacularly when the black customer she refuses to serve returns as the new owner of the entire coffee shop chain. The morning rush at the daily grind was in full swing when Marcus Reynolds joined the line, his tailored charcoal suit and Italian leather briefcase marking him as one of the many professionals seeking their daily caffeine fix. At 42, Marcus carried himself with the quiet confidence of someone who had spent years in boardrooms and business meetings. His dark skin gleamed under the coffee shop's ambient lighting, and his closely cropped hair was immaculately maintained, every detail of his appearance reflecting the meticulous nature that had made him one of Seattle's most successful venture capitalists. Behind the counter, Sarah Mitchell's lips tightened as she watched him enter. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a severe ponytail, her green apron spotless, and her blue eyes sharp as she tracked Marcus's movement in line. She'd been the head barista at the Daily Grind for 3 years, and in her mind, she had cultivated the right kind of customer base for what she considered her shop. "Welcome to the Daily Grind," Sarah called out cheerfully, deliberately making eye contact with the young white woman standing behind Marcus. "I can help you right here." Marcus cleared his throat. "Excuse me, but I was next in line." Sarah's smile didn't waver as she looked past him. "I'm sorry, but I was gesturing to the lady behind you. I'll be with you shortly." The woman behind Marcus shifted uncomfortably. "Actually, he was here first." "Oh, it's no problem," Sarah insisted, her voice honey sweet. "I'm sure he won't mind waiting a moment longer. What can I get started for you?" Marcus felt the familiar weight of the situation settling on his shoulders. He'd been coming to the Daily Grind for weeks, choosing it for its proximity to his office in the financial district. Each visit had brought similar treatment from Sarah, being ignored, served last, or finding his orders mysteriously forgotten. He'd built a multi-million-dollar venture capital firm by knowing when to push and when to observe, and so far, he'd chosen to observe. "I really must insist," the woman behind him said, stepping back. "He was here first." Sarah's smile tightened further. "Well, if you're sure." She finally turned to Marcus, her expression cooling several degrees. "What do you want?" "A large dark roast, please. Room for cream." "Name?" Sarah asked, though she'd seen him nearly every weekday for the past month. "Marcus." She scribbled on the cup, her writing deliberately sloppy. "That'll be $4.75. Marcus offered his credit card, a black American Express that usually drew appreciative looks. Sarah took it between her thumb and forefinger as if it might be contaminated. "The card reader's acting up," she announced, though it had worked fine for the previous customer. "Do you have cash?" Marcus maintained his composed demeanor as he pulled out his wallet and extracted a $5 bill. Sarah made a show of examining it under the light before dropping his change on the counter, rather than placing it in his outstretched hand. He moved to the pickup area where Jake, a younger barista, was preparing drinks. Jake had always been professional with Marcus, though he never contradicted Sarah's behavior. Today, however, Sarah intercepted Jake as he reached for a cup to fill Marcus's order. "I'll handle this one," she said loudly enough for Marcus to hear. "Why don't you take your break?" Jake glanced between Sarah and Marcus, then ducked his head and disappeared into the back room. Sarah turned to the coffee urns, her movements deliberately slow as she served several customers who had ordered after Marcus. 10 minutes passed. The morning rush began to thin out. Marcus's dark roast still hadn't materialized. "Excuse me," Marcus said finally. "I believe my coffee was ordered some time ago." Sarah looked up from wiping the counter, her expression one of exaggerated surprise. "Oh, was that not picked up? I could have sworn I made it. Must have gotten mixed up with another order. I'll have to make a fresh one. It'll be a few minutes." Marcus checked his watch. He had a meeting in 20 minutes. "I've been waiting for 10 minutes already." "Well, if you're in such a hurry, maybe you should try somewhere else," Sarah suggested, her tone making it clear that's exactly what she wanted. "I hear there's a place down on Martin Luther King Way that might be more suitable." The racial undertone was impossible to miss. Several nearby customers looked up, their expressions ranging from shock to discomfort to carefully maintained indifference. Marcus felt a familiar heat rising in his chest, the kind he'd learned to control through years of being the only black face in countless boardrooms. He'd built his career by choosing his battles carefully, by understanding when to confront and when to strategize. Looking at Sarah's smug expression, he knew this would require strategy. "I'd like to speak to your manager," he said quietly. "I am the manager on duty," Sarah replied, her smile returning. "And I have the authority to refuse service to anyone who's being disruptive." "Disruptive?" Marcus kept his voice level. I've been standing here quietly waiting for the coffee I paid for. You're holding up the line and creating a scene, Sarah said loudly. I'm going to have to ask you to leave. I'd like the name of your district manager. Sarah's smile widened. Our owner handles all operations directly. Would you like his email? I'm sure he'll be very interested in hearing how you've been harassing his staff. Marcus took out his phone and made a show of recording the information Sarah recited. He knew it wouldn't lead anywhere. He'd seen enough discriminatory business practices to recognize when management was part of the problem. But he also knew something Sarah didn't. Information was power, and he just gained another piece of it. Thank you, he said calmly, pocketing his phone. I appreciate your time. Don't come back, Sarah called after him as he turned to leave. We reserve the right to refuse service to anyone. Marcus walked out of the daily grind, his shoulders straight and his head high. Several customers avoided his gaze as he passed, their discomfort with the scene palpable. He could feel Sarah's triumphant stare following him through the window. What Sarah couldn't see was the slight smile playing at the corners of his mouth as he pulled out his phone and dialed his office. Janet, good morning. I need you to pull everything you can find on the Daily Grind coffee chain. Ownership structure, financial statements, recent performance, yes, all of it. And get me a meeting with our inside counsel this afternoon. He paused, looking back at the coffee shop through the plate glass window. Sarah was already serving the next customer, her smile restored to its fake cheerfulness. I think I've just found our next investment opportunity. The rest of Marcus's morning was productive, despite the lack of coffee. He attended his scheduled meetings, reviewed quarterly reports, and began laying the groundwork for what would become his most satisfying venture yet. By lunch, Janet had compiled a preliminary report on the Daily Grind's corporate structure. The chain, it turned out, was struggling. What had once been a promising regional business had suffered from mismanagement and declining sales. Their attempts to compete with larger chains had stretched their resources thin, and several locations were underperforming. The owner, a man named Richard Harrison, had been quietly looking for buyers. Marcus spent his lunch hour reading through the financials, each page confirming what he'd suspected. The Daily Grind was ripe for acquisition. Its current troubles meant the purchase price would be reasonable, and Marcus saw potential that the current management had missed. More importantly, he saw an opportunity to transform a toxic culture from the inside out. That afternoon, as he reviewed the situation with his legal team, Marcus thought about all the times he'd encountered discrimination in his professional life. The security guards who followed him in high-end stores, the real estate agents who suddenly remembered other offers when he tried to buy in certain neighborhoods, the countless small indignities that came with being a black man in corporate America. Usually he worked around them, found alternative solutions, focused on his goals rather than the obstacles. But sometimes, when the moment was right, he chose to do more than work around the problem. Sometimes he chose to solve it entirely. As he left the office that evening, Marcus passed by the Daily Grind. The shop was quieter now, the afternoon lull in full effect. Through the window, he could see Sarah arranging pastries in the display case, still wearing that same self-satisfied expression. She looked up as he passed, and her face darkened with recognition. Marcus smiled and waved, knowing it would unsettle her more than any confrontation. Then he continued walking, his mind already working through the steps of his plan. Sarah Mitchell thought she had won their encounter that morning, but Marcus knew better. She had simply given him the motivation he needed to make some changes, starting with his morning coffee routine. Over the next 2 weeks, Marcus made a point of visiting the Daily Grind at different times of day, documenting every interaction. Each visit revealed more about the toxic culture Sarah had cultivated, and each interaction strengthened his resolve to acquire the chain. He's back again, Marcus overheard one of the younger baristas whisper to Sarah on a quiet Tuesday afternoon. The girl, her name tag read Ashley, was new, and she hadn't yet fully adopted Sarah's hostile attitude. Sarah's face clouded as she watched Marcus take his place in line. Let me handle this, she said, loud enough for her voice to carry. We don't want any trouble. Marcus maintained his professional demeanor as he reached the counter, phone discreetly recording in his breast pocket. Good afternoon. I'd like a large dark roast, please. We're out, Sarah replied immediately, despite the fresh pot sitting clearly visible behind her. I can see a full pot right there. That's reserved for our rewards members, Sarah said, her tone suggesting she'd just invented the policy on the spot. Marcus reached into his wallet and produced a Daily Grind rewards card. I am a rewards member. Sarah's eyes narrowed as she examined the card. This isn't activated properly. I'll need to confiscate it. I registered it online last week, Marcus said calmly. Would you like me to show you the confirmation email? A muscle twitched in Sarah's jaw. Behind her, Ashley shifted uncomfortably, clearly wanting to intervene but afraid to challenge her supervisor. The handful of customers in the shop pretended to be absorbed in their laptops and phones, though Marcus could see them stealing glances at the unfolding scene. Sir, you're being argumentative, Sarah declared, her voice rising. I'm going to have to ask you to leave. I haven't argued with you. I'm simply trying to order coffee and showing you my valid rewards card. Now you're creating a disturbance. Sarah reached under the counter, and Marcus saw her hand move toward what he assumed was a panic button. If you don't leave immediately, I'll be forced to call the authorities. Marcus raised an eyebrow. You're threatening to call the police because I'm trying to order coffee? I'm calling them because you're harassing my staff and disturbing our customers. Sarah's voice had taken on a shrill edge. Ashley, go to the back and call 911. Ashley hesitated, her young face troubled. Sarah, he's just standing there. Do it now. Sarah snapped, and the girl scurried away, looking miserable. Marcus remained perfectly still, his phone continuing to record. Around him, customers were beginning to pack up their belongings, clearly not wanting to be present for what was coming next. A few shot him apologetic looks as they hurried out. The police are on their way, Sarah announced triumphantly a few minutes later. I suggest you leave before they arrive. I think I'll wait, Marcus replied mildly. I'm curious to hear how you'll explain to them why you called 911 on a customer trying to order coffee. Sarah's face flushed red. You're trespassing. I told you last time not to come back. I don't recall signing anything agreeing to be banned, and I haven't received any written notice. I'm a paying customer with a valid rewards card, simply trying to make a purchase. The distant sound of sirens made Sarah's smile widen. Marcus calmly took a seat at one of the now empty tables, placed his briefcase beside him, and waited. 2 police officers entered the shop a few minutes later. To Marcus's mild surprise, one of them was black. Their name tags identified them as Officer Chen and Officer Robinson. What seems to be the problem here? Officer Chen asked, looking between Sarah and Marcus. Sarah immediately launched into a dramatic recounting of events, her voice trembling with manufactured fear. This man has been harassing us for weeks. We've asked him repeatedly not to return, but he keeps coming back and intimidating my staff. Today he became aggressive when I tried to explain our rewards program policy. Sir? Officer Robinson turned to Marcus. Would you like to explain your side? Marcus stood slowly, keeping his movements deliberate. Officers, I'm Marcus Reynolds. I've been a customer here for several weeks. I have a valid rewards card, which I tried to use today to purchase coffee. Ms. Mitchell here refused to serve me, as she has done repeatedly, and threatened to call the police when I simply stood waiting to place my order. I have video documentation of our interaction today, as well as several previous incidents. Officer Robinson's expression shifted subtly as he processed this information. Ms. Mitchell, is there any specific reason you refuse service to Mr. Reynolds? He's disruptive. He argues about everything and makes the other customers uncomfortable. I noticed several customers leaving when you called the police, Officer Chen observed. They seemed more uncomfortable with your actions than his. Sarah's confidence began to falter. I have the right to refuse service to anyone. Actually, Marcus said quietly, federal law prohibits discrimination in places of public accommodation. I'd be happy to provide the relevant statutes. Officer Robinson pulled out his notepad. Mr. Reynolds, would you like to file a formal complaint? That won't be necessary, Marcus replied. I'm handling this situation through other channels. He picked up his briefcase. Officers, thank you for your time. Ms. Mitchell, I'm sure we'll be seeing each other again soon. As Marcus walked out, he heard Officer Chen beginning to explain to Sarah the serious nature of making false police reports and the potential consequences of discriminatory business practices. Back in his office, Marcus reviewed the day's recording with his legal team. It joined a growing file of documented incidents, each one strengthening their position for what was to come. The due diligence is complete, Janet reported, placing a thick folder on his desk. The Daily Grind's financial situation is worse than we initially thought. They're carrying significant debt, and 3 locations have closed in the past year. Mr. Harrison is definitely motivated to sell. Marcus nodded, scanning the reports. Set up a meeting. Let's make this happen quickly, before they have a chance to shop around for other buyers. The meeting with Richard Harrison took place 2 days later in Marcus's office. Harrison was a man in his early 60s, his once prestigious chain having slowly slipped away from him through a combination of mismanagement and changing market conditions. Frankly, Mr. Reynolds, I'm surprised by your interest, Harrison admitted, fidgeting with his tie. The daily grind isn't exactly a prime investment opportunity at the moment. On the contrary, Marcus replied, I see significant untapped potential. Your brand still has strong recognition in the region, and your locations are well positioned. With the right management and a few strategic changes, we could turn things around quickly. Harrison's eyes lit up at the prospect of salvation for his struggling business. You really think so? I do, and I'm prepared to make you an offer today. Marcus slid a document across the desk. Full acquisition, including all locations, equipment, and intellectual property. The price is fair considering current market conditions and your outstanding obligations. Harrison's eyes widened as he reviewed the numbers. The offer was indeed fair. Not so low as to be insulting, but low enough to reflect the company's troubles. More importantly, it offered him a clean exit from a situation that had become increasingly stressful. This is very generous, Harrison said carefully. But why the rush? Surely you'd want more time to evaluate the business. Marcus smiled. Mr. Harrison, I've been evaluating your business very carefully, particularly your downtown Seattle location. I've seen exactly what's happening in your stores, and I know precisely what needs to change. Something in Marcus's tone made Harrison look up sharply. Is there a problem with the downtown location? Let's just say I've had some interesting experiences there. Experiences that could potentially become legal issues for the company if not addressed promptly. Marcus kept his voice neutral, but the implication was clear. Harrison paled slightly. I see. He was quiet for a moment, then asked, would you keep the current staff? That would be at my discretion, of course. I have some definite thoughts about necessary personnel changes. Harrison nodded slowly, realization dawning in his eyes. He looked down at the offer again, then reached for a pen. Where do I sign? The paperwork was completed within the hour. As Harrison left, looking both relieved and slightly shell-shocked, Marcus turned to Janet. Prepare the announcement for tomorrow morning. I want every location to receive it simultaneously at the start of business. He paused, then added, and make sure someone is present at the downtown location to document all reactions. I have a feeling Miss Mitchell's response will be particularly interesting. That evening, Marcus walked past the daily grind one last time. Sarah was behind the counter as usual, schooling her features into a scowl when she spotted him. If she found it strange that he smiled and waved cheerfully, she gave no sign. Marcus continued home, knowing that tomorrow would bring changes Sarah Mitchell never saw coming. The time for observing was over. Now it was time for action. At 7 a.m. sharp, a sharply dressed black woman in a crisp business suit entered the cafe, carrying a leather portfolio. Sarah's eyes narrowed. Something about the woman's confident bearing reminded her uncomfortably of Marcus Reynolds. Good morning, the woman said, approaching the counter. I'm Janet Williams, Chief Operations Officer for Reynolds Ventures. I believe you should have received an email this morning regarding changes in ownership. Sarah's hand instinctively went to her phone. She hadn't checked her work email yet, assuming it would contain the usual corporate newsletters she ignored. Opening it now, she found a message marked Urgent Immediate Attention Required at the top of her inbox. As she read, the color drained from her face. This has to be some kind of joke, she stammered. I assure you it's not, Janet replied calmly. The Daily Grind chain has been acquired by Reynolds Ventures, effective immediately. I'm here to oversee the transition and implement our new company policies. She turned to address the other employees. If everyone could gather round, please, this won't take long. Sarah stood frozen as her staff assembled. This couldn't be happening. It had to be some elaborate prank. Any moment now, someone would jump out and reveal the hidden cameras. As of this morning, Janet continued, the Daily Grind is under new ownership. All employees will need to acknowledge receipt of our updated employee handbook, which includes extensive revisions to our customer service policies and anti-discrimination guidelines. Additionally, she paused as the door opened again. Marcus Reynolds walked in, impeccably dressed in a charcoal suit, his presence somehow filling the entire space. Sarah felt her knees go weak as realization crashed over her. Good morning, everyone, Marcus said pleasantly. I'm Marcus Reynolds, your new CEO. I believe Ms. Mitchell and I are already acquainted. Sarah's mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. Around her, she could see her co-workers' expressions shifting as they connected the dots between their new owner and the customer their head barista had been harassing. Mr. Reynolds has been conducting a detailed evaluation of our operations, Janet explained, her tone professional but with an undercurrent of satisfaction. He's identified several areas requiring immediate improvement, particularly regarding our customer service standards and workplace culture. Marcus stepped forward, his gaze steady on Sarah. Ms. Mitchell, would you join me in the office? We need to discuss your documented pattern of discriminatory behavior and multiple false police reports. You, you can't, Sarah sputtered. I can, and I will, Marcus replied calmly. As the new owner of the Daily Grind, I have both the authority and the responsibility to address serious violations of civil rights laws and company policy. The office, please. The back office had always felt like Sarah's personal domain, but now it seemed small and confining as she sat across from Marcus Reynolds, Janet standing by the door with a recorder running. Let's review the events of the past month, Marcus began, opening a folder. We have documented evidence of at least 12 instances where you refused service, provided substandard service, or created hostile conditions for customers based on their race. We have video recordings, witness statements, and your own documented false police report from yesterday. I was just trying to maintain standards, Sarah protested weakly. Standards? Marcus's voice remained level, but his eyes hardened. Would you care to elaborate on what standards specifically required you to refuse service to black customers? To call the police on paying customers who had committed no crime? To create a hostile work environment by pressuring your staff to participate in discriminatory practices? Sarah's face flushed. You're twisting everything. I never... Ms. Mitchell, Janet interrupted, we have video evidence of multiple incidents. Would you like to review them? Marcus held up a hand. That won't be necessary. Ms. Mitchell, I'm going to be very clear about your options. Option 1, immediate termination for cause, with all evidence of your discriminatory practices forwarded to the relevant authorities for potential legal action. Option 2, you may choose to attend our new comprehensive anti-discrimination training program, acknowledge your past behaviors in writing, and accept a probationary period under close supervision. The choice is yours. Sarah stared at him, her world crumbling around her. You're giving me a choice. Everyone deserves a chance to learn and grow, Marcus replied, even people who wouldn't extend the same courtesy to others. The question is, are you willing to learn? Tears welled up in Sarah's eyes, not of remorse, Marcus noted, but of humiliation. I'll take the training, she whispered. Excellent choice. Janet will provide you with the necessary paperwork. You're suspended without pay until the training is complete. If you choose to return afterward, you'll be transferred to our Bellingham location under new management. Marcus stood. I suggest you use this time to reflect on how it feels to have your livelihood threatened based on someone else's prejudices. As Sarah slunk out of the office, Marcus turned to Janet. How are the other locations responding to the announcement? Generally positive, Janet reported. Most of the staff are excited about the new investment and expanded benefits package. We've identified 2 other locations with similar issues, though none quite as severe as this one. Good. Let's get the new training programs rolled out immediately. I want the Daily Grind to become a model of inclusive business practices. He paused. And Janet, make sure Ms. Mitchell's training instructor is Dr. Robinson. Janet smiled. The black woman with 3 PhDs in organizational psychology and civil rights law? Already arranged, sir. Marcus returned to the main cafe area, where the morning rush was beginning to pick up. The staff watched him nervously, clearly uncertain about their own futures. I want to be clear, he announced, that most of you have nothing to worry about. In fact, you'll find that Reynolds Ventures offers significantly better compensation and benefits than your previous ownership. We believe in investing in our people. He turned to Ashley, who was trying to make herself invisible behind the espresso machine. Ashley, isn't it? I noticed you tried to intervene several times when Ms. Mitchell was engaging in discriminatory behavior. That took courage. Ashley straightened slightly. I just didn't think it was right, sir. It wasn't right, and under the new management, that kind of behavior won't be tolerated. How would you feel about taking on more responsibility? We'll be needing a new shift supervisor. Ashley's eyes widened. Really? Yes, I'd love to. Excellent. Janet will get you started on the management training program. Marcus turned to address the whole staff again. The Daily Grind is going to change. We're going to be a place that truly welcomes everyone, that treats both our customers and our employees with respect and dignity. Those of you who share that vision will thrive here. Those who don't. He glanced at Sarah's retreating back. Will need to find somewhere else to work. Over the next few weeks, the daily grind underwent a transformation. Marcus introduced new training programs, revised policies, and improved benefits for workers. He personally visited each location, ensuring that the company's new commitment to inclusive practices was understood and implemented at every level. The downtown Seattle location, under Ashley's supervision, quickly became known for its welcoming atmosphere and excellent service. Regular customers noticed the change, and word spread. Business improved as people who had previously avoided the shop began to return. Sarah did complete her training, though her subsequent transfer request to Bellingham was denied. Dr. Robinson had recommended against placing her in any customer-facing role. She eventually found work at a small independent cafe across town, where her new boss took a dim view of discriminatory practices after experiencing them firsthand at his previous job. 1 month after the acquisition, Marcus sat in the daily grind, enjoying his morning coffee. The shop was bustling, filled with a diverse mix of customers, being served by an equally diverse staff. Ashley approached his table, carrying a fresh cup of dark roast. "On the house, Mr. Reynolds," she said with a smile, "though I'm sure you could expense it if you wanted to." Marcus returned her smile. "Thank you, Ashley. How are things going?" "Really good. Our customer satisfaction scores are up 30%, and we're seeing a lot of new regular customers." She hesitated. "I heard Sarah's working at Bean There Now. Apparently, the owner is a black businessman who used to get the same treatment here that you did." Marcus nodded thoughtfully. "Sometimes the best lessons come from experiencing what you've put others through." He took a sip of his coffee. "Keep up the good work, Ashley. You're proving that success and inclusivity go hand in hand." As Ashley returned to the counter, Marcus watched the morning crowd, satisfied with what he saw. The daily grind had become more than just an investment. It was a statement about the power of turning discrimination into opportunity, of answering prejudice not just with justice, but with positive change. He raised his cup slightly in a private toast. Sometimes, he reflected, the best revenge wasn't about getting even, it was about making things better for everyone who came after you. The coffee, he had to admit, had never tasted sweeter.